Welcome to Season's blog, Real Yield, what it means, why it matters, and how Yield 3.0 delivers it. Anchor was paying approximately 19.5% in dollar-denominated stablecoin yields in early 2022. Most of crypto thought it was normal. Over $18 billion chased that number, until the day it all vanished. The yield, the stablecoin, and roughly $45 billion of market value with it. There's a huge lesson buried in that crater. Real yield is yield funded by actual economic activity, protocol fees, lending interest, trading volume, transfer taxes, rather than by printing new tokens. It scales with how much a protocol is actually used, whereas emission-driven yields, like anchors, inevitably decay as token inflation outpaces user growth. That's why the cleanest test for any real yield claim is to ask, if the protocol stopped issuing new tokens tomorrow, would the yield still exist? This single question separates real yield from the much larger pile of DeFi yield. It's the spine of the evolution from Yield 1.0, legacy TradFi, to Yield 2.0, legacy DeFi, to Yield 3.0, novel DeFi yields, powered by real economic activity. And it's the filter the next wave of yield seekers, both institutional and retail, are already applying. What real yield actually means. Real yield is the portion of a protocol's actual economic output that flows back to those who make it work. Token holders or liquidity providers, for example. The defining quality here is the yield source, that is, recurring value, created by users who voluntarily paid a fee to use the products or services the protocol offers. Some of DeFi's functional real yield models currently include Spot DEXs, collecting trading fees, lending markets capturing the spread between supply and borrow rates, restaking and validator networks earning MEV and consensus rewards, stablecoin issuers earning interest on their reserves, transfer tax tokens redistributing a slice of every transaction, swap, or trade. Platforms like DeFi Llama, Token Terminal, and Masari, among others, segregate real yield protocols from emission-based ones using these parameters. And in doing so, they make three properties apparent across them. 1. The yield is denominated in something other than the protocol's own tokens, freshly minted for yield payouts. 2. APY is dependent on usage and actual economic activity, not merely on price appreciation or speculation. 3. APYs may be elastic relative to demand supply or other market dynamics, but the core mechanism is non-directional and sustainable, especially in the fee-based model. Together, these cover the most critical aspects of any yield source: where the yield comes from, what assets it's distributed in, and how dependent it is on external forces like market mechanics or sovereign policy. The TradFi parallel: dividends, not paper gains. Though we're discussing real yields in DeFi's context, the concept has existed in TradFi for decades. It works on the same principle. The value generated from the productive deployment of a nation or company's capital is paid out to those who provide that capital by holding bonds or stocks, while accepting duration risk. While sovereign and corporate bonds are typically the benchmarks for real yield in TradFi, dividend-paying companies present a more interesting example for our purpose. These are firms that pay dividends, a portion of their earnings, to their stockholders, distinct from the capital gains holders earn when the stock's price increases. Dividend-paying companies have thus built their reputations on durability and resilience, because the discipline of paying real cash from real earnings filters for businesses that survive cycles. Instruments like the S&P 500 Dividend Aristocrats and index tracking companies that have raised their dividends every year for at least 25 consecutive years provide TradFi consumers with access to this category of real yield. Notably, companies that pay and grow their dividends consistently have historically been less volatile than those that don't, mainly because their value is anchored to a tangible distribution record rather than a sentiment-driven multiple. Whereas with companies where stockholders only make paper gains, that is, profits from price appreciation, the value is whatever the next buyer is willing to pay. So when the bid disappears, the gains disappear as well. From the dot-com bubble burst to the 2008 housing crash and the subsequent global depression, TradFi has repeatedly made the importance of real yield abundantly clear. And now, we're seeing a shift in demand towards real value in DeFi as well, away from the emission-based status quo of 2020 to 2022. DeFi's reckoning and shift towards real yields. Thousands of users burned, losing billions, before DeFi began to realize the value of yields generated by real economic activity. Only after 2022. On June 15, 2020, Compound launched its governance token, COMP, and gave it to everyone who lent or borrowed on the platform. Known as liquidity mining, this sparked the DeFi summer when the total value locked, TVL, across DeFi protocols increased from roughly $800 million to over $10 billion in a matter of months. In a rush to imitate Compound's success, almost every DeFi protocol started bootstrapping usage by minting governance tokens and paying them to early users. This worked for a while and created many crypto millionaires, orienting users to believe that triple-digit APYs were genuine and sustainable. Then, 2022 arrived. Bulls stepped away, bears stepped in. Summer turned into winter and markets went into a deep slumber. Cracks appeared in the emission-based models that fueled all the craze in 2020 and 2021. While Compound's yields decayed steadily as its emission schedule tapered, Anchor emerged as the most glaring example of the downsides of emission-funded yields. It had inflated the supply of its Terra USD, UST stablecoin, from about $2 billion to over $18 billion to pay UST depositors approximately 19.5% APY. This didn't come from Anchor's earnings, and when the confidence cracked in May 2022, the catastrophe was swift, erasing roughly $45 billion in a matter of days. Out of that wreckage, the real yield narrative started gaining prominence in DeFi circles by September 2022. GMX became the poster child for protocols that paid holders from actual fees, not printed tokens. Synthetix, one of DeFi's oldest protocols, realigned its tokenomics to adopt this principle. The category got a name because the alternative had just detonated in public. Real yield versus emission-based yield. DeFi yield has two clean sources and a large, murky middle. The clean sources are fees and emissions. The murk is every protocol that blends both and shows you a single APY. Fee-based yield comes from actual economic activity involving users who pay to use the protocol or network. This revenue is accumulated and passed on to the users who generate this value in the first place by paying fees. Yields are thus a direct function of usage, which is exactly what makes it sustainable and resilient, unlike dressed-up inflation. Emission-based yield comes from the protocol minting new tokens and distributing them as yield. There's no genuine external revenue source, and the payout tokens are printed out of thin air. The rates are set by a tokenomics schedule, not by anything the protocol or its users do. And because it's not grounded in any economic reality, emission-based protocols promise absurd, too good to be true APY headlines, which went as high as 1,000% at the DeFi summer's peak. There's a measurable gap between these two forms. Consider a protocol that advertises a 40% APY, while its real yield, total fee revenue, divided by total value locked, sits closer to 2%. The remaining 38% is thus dilution disguised as yield. A 16Z's State of Crypto 2025 also emphasized this point, presenting real economic value as the measure of how much people actually pay to use a network. This metric increasingly matters more than other parameters in a 16Z's view, and tokens that complete their economic loop by routing revenue to holders have a self-sustaining model that can outlast market cycles. For an in-depth discussion of how emission-based yields have structurally decayed over the past 4 decades, read The State of Yield 2026, SOY 2026, Yield 3.0. How fee-based real yields work. Real yield comes from genuine economic activity, which comes from usage. This is the fundamental architecture of Yield 3.0, the next iteration of liquid, fee-based DeFi yield pioneered by Seasons. Its evolution can be summarized as Yield 1.0. This includes treasury bonds, or traditional savings instruments, whose interest payout is stipulated by rates and policies set by central banks. Yield 2.0, DeFi's first iteration of programmatic on-chain yield protocols that don't depend on banks or centralized authorities. However, these models still are limited by their emission-driven or speculative models that depend excessively on short-term price actions and market direction. Yield 3.0, Seasons' novel implementation based on the fee-driven model that generates yield from real economic activity. Besides market-agnostic yield generation, this mechanism also distributes yield in liquid alternative assets, Bitcoin, gold, and yield-bearing stablecoin, not in a native inflationary token/asset. Seasons' Yield 3.0 engine has 3 autonomous modules: Transactional Transfer Tax, TTT, Stakeholder Stablecoin Yield Module, SSYM, and Yield Asset Vaults, YAV, that generate and amplify the yield that node owners earn, simply by holding 10,000 plus Cs in their non-custodial Solana wallets. Only one of the modules, that is TTT, is active as of May 2026. With TTT, every C's transaction, buy, sell, transfer, incurs a 10% fee that is accumulated by the protocol's acquirer contract. These fees are swapped into active inclusion set assets, $WBTC, $XAUT0, and $JLUSDC, and distributed to active nodes twice weekly, directly to their wallets. No staking, deposits, lockups, or withdrawal queues. Each node receives its share of the total accumulated fees based on its C's holdings. A wallet holding 12,000 C's has more node weight and receives more yield than a wallet with 10,000 C's. This mechanism has played out live and in public 48 times since December, as of May 23, 2026, distributing $178,484 plus in total yield. More importantly, the mechanism has proven itself and thrived during some of the most tumultuous and chaotic times in global finance in Q1 2026. That too, with a consistent running APY of 8 to 9%, which is about 2 times higher than the current CPI figures, inflation rate, and DeFi's safe yield tranche. To better understand how you can use your wallet like a savings account with Seasons, read Use Your Wallet Like a Savings Account. Other examples of real yield mechanisms. Yield 3.0 is one of its kind, but as mentioned above, real yield models aren't entirely new or limited to Seasons architecture. Some other prominent examples include trading fee yield, spot and perpetuals, DEXS, collect a fee on every trade, and pass a share to liquidity providers. GMX is the canonical example. It dominated the real yield narrative in 2022 by routing most of its trading fees to LPS and stakers in ETH and AVAX, not in its own freshly minted token. Lending interest yield. Lending markets like Aave match depositors with borrowers. Borrowers pay interest, which lenders receive as yield on their deposited capital, minus the protocol's fee. It's mostly denominated in the deposited asset and depends on the borrowing demand, as well as the utilization rate, how much of the pool has been lent out or borrowed. Staking and validator yield, proof of stake, POS, chains like Ethereum, and restaking networks like EigenLayer let users stake their tokens and earn a reward for helping secure the network. These are available to both validators and general stakers, and are mostly paid in the underlying asset, earning more ETH by staking ETH. Stablecoin reserve yield. Stablecoin issuers like Tether and Circle hold short-duration treasuries against their supply. The interest generated on these reserves can be distributed to the stablecoin's holders as yield. And while the behemoths often keep the interest to themselves, emerging yield-bearing stablecoins fully or partially redistribute them to users. Among these examples, the first two are crypto-native, with little or no TradFi parallels. The other two, however, have almost direct analogs. Staking yields resemble dividend payouts, while reserve yield is similar to money market wrappers. How to tell if your yield is real in less than 60 seconds. You don't need a complex spreadsheet or a fortune-burning consultant to pressure test any yield claim. You only need 4 questions. Where does the yield come from? If the answer is emissions or inflation, it's most likely unsustainable and not so real. If it comes from fees or a similar genuine source of economic value, then it's real and also sustainable. What is the yield paid in? If a protocol pays you in its own tokens, chances are it's printing them for this purpose, that is, emission or inflation. Real yield must be paid in assets that have independent liquidity, markets, and value outside the yield-bearing protocol. WBTC, XAUT, and JLUSDC, for example, are valuable independently for C's or its market performance. They will remain, even if C's doesn't. Does the rate move with usage or with the emissions schedule? Real yields are elastic with volume, and they're essentially uncapped. Emission-based yields, however, follow a preset inflation curve and taper with it. Would the yield survive an emissions stop, or the native token underperforms? When token printing stops, payouts in emission-based yields go to 0. And in the same way, they become worthless when the price of the native token in which the yield is paid drops. Run any high-yield DeFi product through these 4 questions, and its cover often blows up the second question. Do the same with Seasons Yield 3.0 mechanism, and it passes the test on all counts. Fee-based yield, independent of any emission schedule, paid in liquid alternative assets. Plus, both your C's and the yield you earn never leave your wallet. It's always liquid, always earning, always yours. The risks you mustn't overlook. Real yield removes a key compression vector, dilution, but it doesn't hand you risk-free yield. The following are some factors to consider before getting into this space. Volume dependence. The rate is bounded by the activity users generate. In a deeply quiet market, fee revenue compresses. A fee-based design handles that honestly. The mechanism is what's promised, and the rate reflects what actually happened. Smart contract risk, code is code. Billions of dollars have been siphoned off DeFi protocols over the years through various forms of exploits. And this remains a risk for any on-chain yield source, at least theoretically, no matter how resilient or robust it is. Asset side risk. The assets you're paid in can fall. A real yield distributed in BTC or a basket passes through the price risk of those assets, but it's still worth considering, mainly if you're holding the payout assets. Concentration risk. If a protocol's fees come overwhelmingly from one user, one bot, or one liquidity provider, it tends to be fragile. Real yield is only real if the underlying activity is spread across many actors, so it's worth checking the usage concentration, not just headline volume. Governance and parameter risk. Even a clean mechanism can be recut by a governance vote. Fee rates can be lowered or its recipients can be changed. That said, the process of mitigating such issues is typically as transparent as the risk vector itself. Protocols that are open about all 5 risks are more trustworthy than those that promise real yield and name none of them. Either way, always DYOR. Earning real liquid yield with Seasons. Real yield is a structural property of how a protocol funds its distributions. Asking where the yield comes from and what it's paid in are the 2 most critical questions you must ask when evaluating a yield source, both in DeFi and TradFi. And as we already demonstrated, Seasons Yield 3.0 mechanism passes these tests on all fronts, with flying colors. Soon, the protocol will cross the $200,000 mark in total yield distributions. That too, with rates that actually beat inflation, serving as a true on-chain savings and wealth creation instrument. If you're looking to earn a constant liquid cash flow in real assets, wrapped Bitcoin, tokenized gold, and a yield-bearing stablecoin, Seasons is the way to go. and you can get started in less than 5 minutes. Hold 10,000 plus Cs, and that's it. Seize the moment, seize the yield, and just let it grow. Frequently asked questions, FAQs. What is real yield in DeFi? Real yield is yield funded by actual economic activity, protocol fees, lending interest, trading volume, or transaction taxes, rather than by minting new tokens. The test is simple. If the protocol stopped issuing new tokens tomorrow, would the yield still exist? If yes, it's real yield. What is the difference between real yield and emission yield? Real yield is paid out of fees the protocol actually collects. Emission yield is paid by minting new tokens and handing them to depositors. Real yield is bounded by usage. Emission yield is bounded by how many new tokens the protocol is willing to print before its own token loses value. Where did the term real yield come from? It entered DeFi's vocabulary during the 2022 bear market after emission-funded yields collapsed. Anchor Protocol's roughly 19.5% yield on Terra USD imploded in May 2022, erasing tens of billions in value. In the aftermath, protocols that paid holders from real fee revenue, such as GMX and Synthetics, were grouped under the label real yield to set them apart from inflationary, emission-funded payouts. What is Yield 3.0? Yield 3.0 is Season's novel mechanism that generates real yield from genuine economic activity and distributes it to node owners, Solana wallets holding 10,000 plus Cs, in liquid assets such as WBTC, XAUT, and JLUSDC. Yield is paid directly to the node owners' wallets. No staking, no deposit, no claiming, no withdrawal queues. Always liquid, always earning. How does Seasons protocol generate real yield? Seasons applies a 10% transactional transfer tax on every Cs transaction. That tax accumulates, is swapped into the inclusion set assets, and distributed directly to active nodes, wallets holding 10,000 plus Cs, twice weekly. As of May 2026, Seasons has distributed almost $180,000 in total yields, round after round, without fail. Is real yield safer than emission yield? Different risks, not zero risk. Real yield protocols carry smart contract risk and depend on transaction or trading volumes. Emission-funded protocols carry the same smart contract risk, plus a deeper structural problem. The yield itself is funded through dilution. Real yield removes one decay vector, but it does not, cannot, remove all risks